investigation, probing the unique qualities that mark those who disturb, challenge, and lead. It is the search for the original. These specially commissioned television portraits are presented by Moses Znaimer.
Performance artist Laurie Anderson was compelled to seek her future by what she saw on television.
I was very conscious of growing up in the middle of a country and feeling tugged both ways. I guess it was television that really brought me to New York in a way. Although we weren't allowed to watch TV as kids. We would go read a book, go out and play, anything but watch TV. But I would sneak over to friends' houses and watch. And at the time, this is in the 50s, all the TV was live, and so it was all originating in New York. And so they'd go, good evening, it's 9 o'clock in New York, and I'd look at the clock and it would be 8. And I think, wow, New York it's later there, it's darker, it's more exciting, gotta go.
Performance art, which is what Laurie Anderson does better than almost anyone, is to art what the decathlon is to sport. A blend of design, sculpture, technology, music, and dance. It is meant to entertain, but it is also about art. A test of the audience as well as the artist. Follow me, Laurie Anderson says, into a world of related images, sounds, and myths. Follow me, if you can.
I suppose mostly the games we played were mostly cowboy and Indian games. But they were mostly Indian games, really. And we would try to build Indian forts. But that was a whole obsession at the time in the Midwest, really was, in the 50s anyway. There was a motel chain that was popular at that point. And it was called Eat and Sleep in a Wigwam. And A-frames had just been discovered. And so skiing was not great in the Midwest. So they erected these, A-frames everywhere. And people would check it in out of the wigwams in their station wagons. And also it's a part of the country with a lot of Indian names. And with a little smattering of French names that drifted in later, Des Moines and of course, hopelessly mispronounced. With a perfectly lovely French town, Des Plaines, we say Des Plaines. And to my ear, that actually sounds very nice. It's all flattened out, just like the landscape, 180 degrees of sky. But it was, what was left of that culture was more in state parks, Potawatomi State Park or whatever. And occasionally it gets resurrected. I mean, I suppose by the time I got there, it had gone through many permutations, let's say through even the 19th century, a guy like Longfellow trying to rewrite Indian songs, and trying to get the into the meter of his poems. By the time it filtered to us, it was more or less in Ham's beer commercials, and you'd see little beavers slapping their tails against hollow logs and going, "From the land of sky blue waters," and then the little maidens Indian maidens come out, waters comes the beer refreshing, hams. You know, that was, that was pretty much what was left of the Indian heritage by that point.
What Fassbinder film is it? The one-armed man comes into the flower shop and says, "What flower expresses days go by?" And they just keep going by endlessly, pulling you into the future.
The only place that I saw that was as beautiful was New Mexico. And it has that same enormous feeling of openness. And so I was actually going to move there last year to the desert. And then I was describing how beautiful I thought the desert was to a friend. And he said, you know, I look out at the desert and I just see so much kitty litter. You know, this destroyed it for me completely. I was thinking, you know, just under the surface, this is really awful. Plus, I think that I can think of a couple artists who moved there, Agnes Martin and Georgia O'Keeffe in particular. And there's something very death-oriented about the desert. I mean, you can certainly make a wonderful case for the opposite. Oh, yeah, but life is more subtle. And it's true. It is. There are lots of little strange beetles scurrying around in the sand and just very wildly different life forms. But I think that I like to have contact with people and noise and streets, and I've gotten so used to that that I think I wouldn't last very long in the desert. I was very obsessed with trying to think of a situation that had never happened before in the world. I don't know why. I would construct these elaborate scenarios about events and hope that they had never happened. Actually, later found out that some of them actually had, which is sort of a shock. But because the only thing that as a child came into my world as very exotic really were Bible stories. And these were presented as, you know, events in this distant, barbarous land. Sort of how I think of my own childhood now, events in a distant, barbarous land. But they were the only things that had a lot of terror in them, and surprise and miracles. And you know, when you'd look around at your little town, it didn't seem like miracles were possible. So I tried to kind of make some up myself.
Listen, 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 listen to my heartbeat.
I always thought of myself as a loner, really, and that I'd like to write stories and draw pictures, and I didn't feel a big impulse to show them to people, you know. I didn't feel like that necessarily had to be a part of it. Now as an artist, I feel the need to do that. I'm still a loner and a hermit, and many of the things that I do are just sit in the studio for weeks and play, or shoot film and just see how it comes out, and or sit at my computer and do computer animations. So, but I don't really consider it done until I've communicated it to someone else. That's been the biggest change for me, really, is that I think that it's very important that a work of art be able to be communicated to another person, and they go, I know what you're talking about. In fact, I kind of thought the same thing myself. You know, it's familiar. It's not so interested in getting these exotic, bizarre images, you know, that are, I think of it more like I have an axe, and there's this huge frozen ocean that's in everybody. Just chip away at that, pull up a piece that's not so unusual looking, it's just kind of, and I just try to look at it differently. I try to, from far away, or try to think of it way in the future or way in the past, try to let it resonate, and then I try to describe it as well as I can. Many of the major sort of spiritual movements, or spiritual changes, let's say, because movement is too organized. Spiritual changes are based on this 2000 looming up over the horizon. What does it mean for the millennium to end? And for many people, particularly for Americans, I think it's there's a lot of fear involved in this moment. And its results are that the results of this fear are an extremely conservative way of looking at the world, a fearful way, in other words. And on the other hand, an incredible, wound up, potentially very dangerous kind of violence, which is also the opposite of this kind of fear. It's like this, it's very tense. It has a lot of tensile strength, both of these things. And I think that the end of this second 1,000 years, in our calendar anyway, is, it's just not the way people pictured it, you know? It didn't quite turn out this way. There's so much chaos and a lot of pain and struggle. So people try to, well, correct it, because we're running out of time, you know? And it's like when you lose your real power, that's when you start throwing around what's left of it. Or when your body starts to fall apart, that's when you start doing frantic aerobics. You just need to look at films to see, starting in the 30s or 40s, that happiness seems to be this insane, basically unachievable goal of particularly Americans. I think quite a few Americans think that the happy ending was designed by European film directors in the 30s and 40s to eventually drive Americans crazy. And as a conspiracy theory, I think this one actually has a little weight, you know, because I think Americans, we have this sort of expectation that we're supposed to be happy, and no one can live up to this, no one. But our culture slams this into us all the time, you know, like, get this, be happy, do this, be happy, you'll be happy. And it's so depressing when you realize that is not very human. You just will never achieve this kind of happiness. Sometimes I think that women are the only ones left with a sense of humor. I mean, I've been really kind of looking to them to get me through the last year or so. There's Roseanne Barr, who's a comedian, American comedian, who did a very hilarious, totally out-of-tune version of the national anthem at a baseball game. This became a national scandal because, of course, baseball is quite sacred. And even George Bush scolded her. The only person that George Bush has scolded has been Hussein. And if you think of the number of people he's had a chance to scold, starting with his own son, you know, it's pretty staggering. So she was scolded for that breach. I think women make very good social critics, so I always try to listen to what other women have to say. And I think We do because, you know, we can look at the power situation and make some kind of connections, analyze it, because we don't have any real power. We don't make any real decisions. So we have nothing to lose. You know? It's a very different situation. And but I don't have a lot of hope for that particular situation changing, because I truly cannot imagine something that I would like to see sometime in my lifetime, which would be a woman, an old woman presenting the news on TV. You know, just her analysis, her opinions, and it's something that I can't quite picture, you know, because it's, I don't mean these like bimbo types, the one who is the old male sage's bright but perky mistress in these fake TV news team families. You know, that's not who I mean. I mean some funky old woman who just, you know, talks, looks straight into the camera without being beautiful, you know, and just talks. And if I get to see that, I'm going to be real happy. I kind of doubt it.
It's watching you.
Watching you.
And you're watching it.
Watching it.
Culture Shock continues on Trio.
How you like that?
I don't think of what I do as a struggle. Really, I think of it as a great privilege. No, there are days I think of it as a struggle and a big mistake, I suppose, when I can't think of anything, or when I just can't articulate what I want to do, you know. But I'm an artist because it's one of the few things that you can do in this world in which you're totally free. There are no rules, you know, and I have always resented it when people say, you know, read off their list of rules, and I go, for what? You know, who wrote these things and why? You know, they never made sense to me ever. I have a lot of rules myself. I couldn't make something unless I constructed my own rules about how things should look. You know, they're kind of wacky rules, but and they change all the time. Does that qualify them as rules? Maybe not. Maybe it's preferences, you know. So, but actually, you know, I do think that art gets kind of messy unless it coheres to some kind of, I guess you could call them rules. So, but you asked about confidence to do my own work, and I suppose sometimes it does cross my mind of what right do I have to stand up here and do this? And fortunately, it doesn't cross my mind very often, because I think I would start to trust myself less, and I think it's, or my own opinions less, and I think that of all the things that's one thing that human beings are not very good at, is trusting themselves. Just trying to think, what do I alone in a room, not listening to anyone, the president, my mother, my boyfriend. What do I want to do? You know, what do I really consider worth my time, and what would I like to contribute to this very short life? You know, how can I express it?
We're so pretty. We're so pretty. We say, watch us move. Watch us shake.
I guess I don't believe in failure.
We're so
I think that you can do something that you're not very well equipped to do, but that's not necessarily at all a failure. It's just a mismatch, you know? And you have to find something that everyone's good at what they love to do. Everyone. That's, you know, I know this, you know. They're very good at what they love. And if they think they love it and they're a little bit fumbly, they'll get better at it, you know. Or if they think they love it and they're not good at it, then maybe it's, maybe they should think about whether they just love it because it's supposed to be lovable, you know, something like this. And I think failure for me is in the same category as pride, you know. It's not real necessary concept, you know, that it's just one more way that we not only get judged by other people, but continually judge ourselves. And I think that if you can appreciate the joy that you can feel in doing something, and that's a sounds, I'm sure, just stupidly naive, but I really believe that more than anything else.
We often end up on this program with more artists than any other single category or occupation. And we've speculated that this is so because communications is, after all, their business. Laurie Anderson's managers recently urged her to do more videos to promote her music, but once done, they turned out to be PSAs, public service announcements on subjects that happened to appeal to her. Well, of course, nobody ran them as music except Much Music, because we like that sort of thing, that zany desire to communicate, which is expressed in a variety of styles and forms and media, all within the discipline of a performance. This has, since the 1970s, placed Laurie Anderson in the avant-garde of an art where the pace of change is remorselessly fueled by technology, and that's why Laurie Anderson is an original.
You're watching Trio.